Hi, everyone. Welcome to Project Herpetoculture podcast. I'm your host, Roy Arthur Blodgett, and I'm joined as always by my intrepid co-host, Philip Leitz of Arids Only. We have an excellent show for you today, but before diving in, we have some brief housekeeping. So first, I'd like to thank Dylan and the Animals at Home Network for hosting our show. It continues to be a pleasure to be part of this platform. We'd also like to extend special gratitude to Charlie, who generously edits our audio and has done a lot to improve the quality of our show over time. And we'd also like to take a moment to tell you about our sponsors. So first, we have Custom Reptile Habitats, who have been with us since day one. They produce top-of-the-line PVC reptile enclosures, and I use them for a lot of the large format Vivaria here. They're also carrying universal rocks, misking products, and a bunch of other useful stuff. So if you're in the market for any of that and you're planning to make a purchase, consider doing so through the link in our bio or description. We'll receive a small commission at no additional cost to you, and that really helps us keep the lights on over here.
Up next, we have Fairy Tale Dragons. That's a joint venture between Heather Moy and Ron St. Pierre, both of whom have achieved legendary status in herpetoculture. They've accomplished quite a lot and produced some of the finest bearded dragons and taliqua in the country, alongside a whole host of other species such as emerald tree boas and green tree pythons. Check them out if you're in the market for any of that, and be sure to follow along with them on social media. They're always up to something interesting over there.
Next, we have Cold-Blooded Caffeine, roasters of delicious coffees from all over the globe. We have a private label with them, the PH Blend, which is a light roast coffee from Rwanda. It's a great choice for those who prefer a more floral coffee with notes of berry, but they have a wide variety of options for a broad array of preferences. So check them out. And if you place an order, don't forget to use the code PROJECTHERP for 10% off.
We're also very pleased to have the support of Exoterra, a brand that needs no introduction. It's safe to say that herpetoculture wouldn't be where it is today without the influence of Exoterra. For decades, they've been industry leaders in innovation, offering just about everything needed for reptile care, from diets and supplements to enclosures, substrates, and lighting. We're both big fans of their naturalistic terraria and substrates in particular. They have a lot of interesting products in the works as we speak, and we're really looking forward to seeing what comes next.
And next we have Temperament Designs. For those in the know, Temperament Designs is widely regarded as one of the finest enclosure manufacturers on the planet. They produce outstanding large format Vivaria with endless options for customization, drains, UV printed backgrounds, lighting rigs. On top of all of that, they also make amazing deli cup displays for expos and these incredible multi-unit condos, which I use here. So if you're interested in any of that and you decide to make a purchase, use the code Herpetoculture for 15% off one item as a special offer to our listeners only. We also have Happy Dragons. We're really thankful to have the support of Happy Dragons. They are producing some amazing content for bettering our reptile care. And we've been actually partnering with them to produce even more content like webinars. Also, the platform and subscription service offers breeder access to first clutches, things like that. We have online courses coming down the pipeline. In addition, we have live Q&As with reptile experts, such as Mariah Healy from Reptophiles. It's truly an outstanding subscription package that also offers discounts on their supply partners, such as Ovipost and Joss's Frogs. It's really an outstanding product. So check it out. And let us know what you think.
And last but not least, if you're interested in supporting the show directly with something of a tip or a monthly donation, check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/projectherpetoculture. We have a monthly live chat there with all of our paid subscribers. That's been a whole lot of fun so far. We also have a whole line of merchandise like t-shirts, mugs, pint glasses, and more on our website. And of course, sharing the show with a friend, subscribing on YouTube, and keeping up with social media is always very helpful.
And with all that said, we're on to the show. Thanks, everybody. All right, here we are, Project Herpetoculture Podcast, episode number 90. And we have an amazing guest today who I'm very excited to talk to, and that's Paul Duren. Paul, thank you so much for being here. How are you?
Hey, I'm great, man. It's good to be here. I'm excited to chat with you guys.
Likewise, yeah. Yeah, I'm really excited about what you're doing, and I want to get into all that. But before we kind of get into what's happening now, I'd love to hear a little bit about just kind of your background and how you found yourself wading into herpetoculture.
Sure. So I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, and always came from like a camping family, and not anybody who was particularly into natural history or anything, but like we went to museums, we went to the zoo and all of that kind of stuff. I didn't grow up catching snakes in the backyard or anything like you usually hear, but as I got into my teens and college years, I realized I really, really liked being outside and really enjoyed learning more about the natural world. So I wound up getting a degree in environmental education, and then never did anything specifically with that. I spent my career as a home builder, but tried to build, environmentally progressive housing, and still spending lots of time outside. Just like I like looking at birds. I like looking at everything. Right? It's not specifically herbs, and then basically, so I'm almost 60. About 5 years ago, my younger child started being in charge of taking care of a couple of garter snakes at his high school, and then he was bringing them home on vacations, and he started learning more about them and teaching me about it. And I'm like, oh man, this is super cool. And he eventually took over the care of them, brought them home, and then I just sort of took his ball and ran with it.
That's so cool.
That's wild. 60? That's crazy. Yeah. That's crazy. It'll look 60 at all. I look close.
Yes, no, I think it's crazy too.
Yeah. I believe it. It's crazy. Okay.
I love that origin story just because it's so different from the standard lines that I tend to hear, and it's maybe something we can get into, but I'm just really curious, like how, entering into herpetoculture in a different stage of life than most folks do, how that has changed and informed your keeping and all of that stuff versus, coming into it as a crazy kiddo,
right,
stealing stuff and putting it in the cardboard box in the garage, or that kind of thing. It's kind of entering into a different kind of maturity.
Yeah, I forgot to say I did have a green anole as a kid, and I had a red-footed tortoise, but I didn't really want either one of them. I was kind of scared of the tortoise. I was really little. And my dad was just like, yeah, here you go. You get a tortoise. Like, I don't want a tortoise. What the hell is that?
Yeah. That's crazy. Like, why would you give me this?
Right, exactly. Right. It has a beak. I don't like it.
Yeah, totally.
Great. What a fun
but they unfortunately didn't receive any kind of care that I would be proud of today. But no, but coming into it as a charitably middle-aged guy, it's great because I don't really have anything to prove to anyone, right? Like, and it's been really nice to make friends and everything. But if people don't like what I'm doing, whatever, it doesn't bother me at all.
Like, I'm too old for this. You could leave me alone.
Yeah, like okay. Somebody gave me an angry emoji on Facebook. Yeah. Oh no!
What?
Yeah, somebody laughed at me on Facebook. Oh, no, it's really liberating, right? And it's also super fun because I get to have like full on beginner mind. Which is a really nice thing at my advanced age. I really enjoy that. And also I feel like I know more about how to learn things now than I did when I was younger. And so it's been, I feel like I've had a decent, like my learning curve hasn't been too awful because like I have better bullshit filters and I I can dive into things that seem really interesting and seem really productive, and things that aren't going to be useful, like they get weeded out really quickly.
So another thing I'm curious along that train of thought is like, because, you say it started with these garter snakes, right? But now you're working with stuff that's significantly larger and much different, right? So obviously you're talking primarily about the scrub pythons, right? So can you talk a little bit about how you made how that journey kind of progressed from garter snake to scrub python? And then additionally, if you can add in, because, all the things you were just talking about, this sort of, maybe we'll call it like a very holistic, open-minded approach, because you were coming in without any of the youthful arrogance, youthful need to prove yourself, all this other stuff. Do you think that played into making a decision to work with scrub pythons? Like, or has it influenced the things that you choose to work with and to keep?
Let's see. That's a complicated question. And people ask me a few times, like, why scrub pythons? And part of it is just, I'm like, because they're freaking cool. And I think also there was a little bit of that, just personality wise, like I'm the kind of person who is going to be like, oh, that's the snake person's snake. I don't want the I don't want the same snake that everybody else has. And I don't think that's actually really a very admirable personality trait, but there it is. But also I just like, okay, so let me back up a little bit. How did I get there? So when we had the garter snakes, and I was thinking about like, okay, what do I want to keep?
Yeah.
How many? And at that, at the beginning, I'm like, I want to keep everything, right? Yeah. Like everybody has, right? I still have that to some extent, but a lot less now. And at first I thought I would just get snakes that were endemic to places that I had been and that were important to me personally.
Cool.
And particularly like North American colubrids. And I did that a little bit. The first thing I got was this little Bituophis who's down in this one right here, northern Mexican pine snake. And he's great. Like he's super cool.
Those are beautiful snakes.
They're really beautiful, and they're fantastic to keep too. Like if you want a snake that you can put in the little kid's hands and not worry about, like super docile, but they're interesting. They move around in a cool way. They're beautiful. Everybody looks at it and they're like, "Wait, what?"
Yeah,
like
those.
What?
Mexican pines and fox snakes are the best looking Pituophis in my book. They're the coolest.
Yeah, so pretty.
So cool. Yep. Sorry. Anyway, I derailed.
No, it's fine. But like basically over time, I was. It's really hard to know what you like until you try it, right?
Absolutely.
And I really didn't like the idea of. I don't like buying an animal, living with it for a year, and then getting rid of it, just because it doesn't, it's not quite the right thing. If I can avoid that, I mean, I don't think that's the worst thing in the world, but I don't want to do that. So then I basically, I started looking at meeting people and seeing what they kept, and going to a few people's houses that were generous enough to let me in and see what they had and see which snakes really spoke to me personally, just from looking at them, sometimes getting to hold them, or sometimes watching the owners interact with them. And so that I've got like this little retic here, and then and I eventually got the pair of scrubs back there. But mostly just from going from this idea of I want to have a collection that's focused on this intellectual idea to then, wait, no, experience is guiding me that when I hang out with these snakes, I really like them. So, that's what I'm moving in that direction.
I got to clear the air. Roy called me on the. I didn't know. I totally blanked on the fox snakes being Pantherophis. I thought they were Pituophis. I'm a big idiot. Please, internet. God damn it.
Was Roy texting you about that?
Yes.
I just hit him with the group chat real quick.
I was trying to just be gracious about that.
I would so much
Don't
rather
feel they are the best. You're right.
Yeah, I would so much rather be like, hey, actually, those are not that, because I'll be like, shit, you're right.
It starts with a P. Yep.
No, damn it.
Close, similar vibe.
I mean, they just look.
I just don't want my people out there to feel too dirty about that. So I just had to give them a heads up.
Someone's not going to listen the extra minutes to realize that I owned up to it. So.
Yeah, they're already going to be in the comment section just roasting. But
you guys should just put this in the outtake reel.
Yeah, we can just.
There we go.
Cut that. Yeah,
the DVD extras.
Yeah, Charlie, can you edit this out?
Cut it, dude. That's awesome. Anyway, I'm sorry. That just like, as soon as you should have said nothing is what you should have said, because then I would have just gone to my grave, and then someone would be like, idiot fox snakes are Pantherophis, and I'd be like, right. I'd have to make a.
Oh yeah, I know the problem. Pantherophis Phil.
Yeah.
The problem is that I'm hitched. I'm wedded to you through this joint venture that we share, and it reflects poorly on me.
You can't be seen cavorting with a ding dong. Yeah, I get it. I get it, dude. I'm the dummy of the show. I understand.
Yeah, you're the plucky comic relief.
Yeah,
exactly. That's what we need. It's just what we need on two steps.
Galaxy Quest.
That's from Galaxy Quest.
Yeah, dude.
Yes,
very good. Plucky comic relief.
Oh, that's such a classic.
Crewman number 6. He was just gonna die all the time. Yep. Holy shit! That is one of the best movies ever made. Anybody out here? It is so good. When you are our last hope. Oh my god!
Oh my god! Oh, that's really good.
I know. I got that one. Block. Holy crap! Okay, I'm an idiot.
Wow.
Pantherophis and Pituophis.
Well, I'm really glad we just had that little tangent, but to get back to what Paul was saying.
Already off. Get away from Galaxy Quest.
I really appreciate just that like what you're speaking to about this kind of arc of trying different things and seeing what actually works for you, and that's something that I've kind of shared that like a lot. Like, I mean, there's this kind of pattern I feel like where people can be really harsh on beginning keepers who or will try a species and then they'll like sell it, and then they'll get something else and they'll try something else. And I can understand that cycle can be hard on animals. But I also feel like it's important for people to find those things that really they feel passionate about, and that they're motivated to care for really well, and that they're motivated to keep learning from. And so it's an important thing to dignify, I think, that impulse and encourage that process of experimentation, because it is so true that you can like look at a picture of a green tree python or an emerald tree boa and be like, that is the most beautiful animal in the world. I really want to keep that. And then you keep it and you're like, this thing just kind of sits on a branch all day long and is most active at night. And I never really interact with it. And it wants to bite me when I do. And I kind of want something that I can actually hold, and then it's a totally different experience. So I just appreciate you sharing that. And I know you already expressed, a little bit about like just like the why scrub python thing, and that part of it obviously is just that they're really cool, but which is just objectively true. I think we can all agree on that. But now that you are keeping them, and you have been keeping them for a while, I'm curious about like what about that taxa in particular is like has really spoken to you. It seems to me like from our conversations that we've had that like those are the animals that you're like really like, okay, these are my thing, of the things that you've shared. And so I'm curious what makes them that way.
I wouldn't, I don't feel like they like the scrubs themselves are like, oh, I am the scrub guy, or that, this is my totem animal or anything. It's more the experience that I've had with them with breeding them and going through the whole maternal incubation and maternal care thing, that completely blew my mind. And I mean, that's an experience I could have had with a few other species as well, I think. But the way that they handled it, or the way that the mom handled it, and the way that the babies are growing up now, that has been completely mind blowing. I mean, just oh my God, an amazing experience. And so, I mean, the thing, when I think about like, what do I love about these guys? I mean, I love just looking at them, and every time I walk in the room and I see like, oh, it's perched this way, or oh, it's perched that way, or oh, I let it out and it climbed up on top of the mini split, or I mean, I love all of that stuff too. But this whole experience of going through breeding them and everything, that's been just a completely next level experience. Yeah.
So walk us through it, because I mean, obviously, this is, you and I have talked about this a little bit, so I have some insight and backstory into it. But I'd love to just like hear you walk us through the whole process from like, initially seeing them courting, and then all the way to the decision making process of like, do I do MI, do I not, all that. I'd love to just hear the story.
So when I got them, they were 7 years old, and they had locked a few times with their previous owners, but they hadn't. She had never actually become gravid, and never laid any eggs or anything. And with these guys, so I got them in October, like 13 months ago, and had them in quarantine in a different room in smaller cages and everything. And then at the beginning of the year, when they cleared quarantine, I brought them in here, and I built these two big old cages, and there's a pass through them and everything.
Oh, cool.
And they pretty quickly, when I opened up the portal between the two, it was clear that there was interest like right away. And once they figured out how to use the tube between the two, they were really happy to be reunited, right? And it was so cool. I mean, I remember like one night I woke up at 3 a.m. I couldn't sleep, but I turned on my phone. I'm like, okay, I'm going to look at the scrub cam, and I turned it on, and like, oh my God, oh my God, they're doing it.
That's great.
It was so cool. I was like, oh, wow. But the decision to do MI, like I made that, just wasn't even really a decision. Like I just knew from the beginning, like, okay, if I pair these two, and just one more bit of context, these guys were imported in the same batch together from Papua or from Indonesia. I'm not sure where they were, but they were captive hatched on a farm there, and then imported together in 2017.
Okay.
So it's unknown whether they're siblings or what, but they came in a batch from about 30 snakes. But I always knew from the beginning that like if I bred them, I was always going to do MI, because the whole point for me of keeping them is to try and get it, try and allow them to do as many natural behaviors as possible. So, like as an example, when the male wants to get out of the cage because it's breeding season, and he's like, let me out. Like, okay, I let him out, and he cruises all around. And I mean, I haven't let him in with the female this year, but just like any time that there's an opportunity to let them do a natural behavior, and then that's really what I want to do. And I mean, that just goes along with like sort of basically that's the bottom line for all of my keeping. So there was never really a question. And then when she ovulated, and then when it was clear that she was gravid and then laid eggs, it was just like, okay, well, that's just what we're going to do. So
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. Can you describe, I remember in chatting with you, you kind of designed like a nesting chamber for her. And I'm curious if you could describe like what that ended up looking like and how you did that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was, actually, you had a really great idea that was really helpful in thinking about that. When I talked to various breeders about like, hey, I'm thinking about doing NI with scrubs, people are like, wait, what? That's crazy. Like, you totally should not do that. That's a terrible idea. And one of the main things that people were worried about was maintaining humidity. And so initially I had a nest box, so basically a big plastic bin with 1 million holes in the bottom, a bunch of sphagnum moss in it. And then that was set above, basically nested within another same size plastic bin that had a little bit of water in the bottom and an aquarium heater. And so there was like a layer of warm water right below the upper nest box, if that makes sense. And so the idea was that warm water would provide a gentle humidity for the rest of the nest. It turned out not to be necessary, and I think the humidity was actually a little bit too high. And it made it so that she was unable to. In retrospect, I think it made it so that she was unable to regulate the humidity because the humidity was just too high. So after about a week or so, and the eggs were getting mold on them faster than I was comfortable with, I just left the inner nest in the box or in the cage, and I got rid of the water bath and just then it was fine.
So it wasn't even needed. I love that.
No, it wasn't. Because they're really good at doing this stuff on their own.
Yeah. Who would have thought?
So I'm a little curious, like, why did people think it was such a bad idea? I mean, like, other than just the humidity being like a concern, like it wouldn't even occur to me that it would be a problem or like potentially not the right move. I totally understand why somebody would want to like pull them and artificially incubate. I get it. That's fun too. But like, I don't, it's hard for me to imagine. I mean, I guess, I don't know. Cause I've had people ask me before, if you're setting up nesting for a lizard, they ask, the people who are not experienced with reptiles will say, well, do you leave the eggs in the box or do you pull them out and incubate them artificially? I'm like, pull them out and incubate them artificially. That I don't really give it a second thought, but at least with a snake, I'd be like, no, I feel like you can just leave them,
Yeah. I mean, as to why, I mean, I think that's one of those questions where being a relative noob in the hobby, I had the same question, like, well, what do you mean that's a bad idea? Like, they do it in the fucking world.
Yeah. You're out there in the jungle. Yeah.
Under the most severe selection pressure that there is. Like, if you don't do it right, everybody dies. So they're probably pretty good at it. But I mean, I think there's a number of reasons why, what people were telling me is you won't be able to maintain the parameters. And to me, it comes down to like this fundamental, like that so many people have like, in this hobby and particularly, I don't know if it's even more so with breeders, but so many people have this like fundamental mistrust of their animals. They think that they're stupid or, they don't trust that the animals can do that the natural behaviors are going to actually be in the interest of the animal. And I guess I don't get it. Like, I think also people, I think if you have a small if you're like trying to maximize for economic return, like you're trying to breed as many animals as possible, so you have them crammed in relatively small enclosures, sure, it'd be really easy to screw that up, right? Because you don't have any kind of gradient. The animals can't make any decisions on their own because you're not giving them anything to choose between, right? And then I think the other thing is just like, well, that's just how we do it.
Sure.
Like, we've always done it that way, and that's how we do it.
Right.
But I mean, and to be fair, lots of people were like, oh, that's really like, wow, that's really brave. I would never do that. I mean, I think cool. I don't think it's going to work, but cool for you for doing that. It wasn't that people were telling me they weren't telling me like, don't do it, but they were saying, yeah, it's probably not going to work.
I'm guessing that it's costly, right? Like I'm not familiar with what the average price on a scrub python is, so I have no idea. But I'm guessing they're not horribly cheap, right?
Yeah, I mean, what's a captive bred one, like $600 or $800, something like that?
Yeah,
right. So if you think about it from that perspective, it's like you can, whether either a financial or even just enjoying the animals. Like if you think about it as potentially risky because it's not done that much, then it makes sense that someone would be a little apprehensive, right? But I think it's cool to take the chance and kind of trust that they know what they're up to. There's a lot of I feel like on a certain level. Actually, I've had conversations with my shop guy Brendan about this, where I kind of get the feeling that a lot of the stuff that is lauded as like this super difficult thing to breed, they're probably not as complicated once you get a certain number of things kind of dialed in and you just leave them alone because they know what they're up to. But but then it works in reverse too, something that's like that we call very, very easy, like a leopard gecko or a bearded dragon or, whatever, to do it well for a long time and, have a prioritization of the breeder's health. I mean, it's not that simple. You know what I mean? No, but not anybody can just do it. They all have their quirks and their things that you can do to make it better, make it work more efficiently, make it better for, in any way for those animals. So I feel like that kind of cuts both directions. But there's a lot of conversation that I'll have with Brendan and with a lot of other people that just goes something like, dude, just relax. They know what they need to do. You don't have to interfere. You don't have to putz around here too much. Just if you set the parameters, whatever those are for you, whatever the levers you're pulling, if you just do those in the right way and just kind of leave them be, they know what they're up to. They're not.
Yeah.
You're not stupid.
And the more choices they have, the wider gradients that you can give them, the more margin for error you have with making your best guess of what it is they want,
right?
Or what it is they need, right?
Right.
You got way more room for error.
I think that's such a critical thing in this is like, it would be probably a lot harder to do MI successfully if you were keeping them in like a rack system.
Totally.
Right. Because the whole idea of the rack system, right, is that you have a narrower range, you have a narrower gradient, but the rationale is that it's within the optimum range, whatever that might be for a given species. But I think that it makes a lot more sense that you'd be more successful if there's a broader range, because then obviously you're trusting the wisdom of this animal, right? And its innate ability to do what it's always done, and the more choice you offer it, the more empowered it will be.
Yep.
That's really cool.
And she did a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't think she was going to do, or that I was really worried about, or freaked me out. And
what are those things? What are some of those things?
Well, like the most obvious one is the very first day she left the nest.
Wow, yeah.
So she laid the eggs, and
did she kind of mound them? The whole like mound.
She glued them into a ball.
Okay.
So, which I'll come back to that. That was still freaking cool. So people don't know when they lay their eggs. They basically the way that this nest box works, she sort of made a hollow in the sphagnum moss, and then laid one at the bottom, and then like 3 and then 5, and then 3, and then 1, or, something like that. So basically it made a sphere.
That's so cool.
So cool, right? It's so cool. And then she left. And, I came downstairs and she's sitting on the basking shelf. And I was just freaking out, like, oh my God, she abandoned the nest. Like, what am I going to do? I mean, I've got an incubator set up, but shit, I don't, like, oh my God, what if the babies are already dead?
Yeah, totally.
And
very, very normal, rational concern.
right,
I would have been right there with you.
Brand new dad, like your brand new grandpa, whatever.
Yeah.
And I texted a friend of mine who had recently done MI with retics. And she said something that just became my mantra for the entire project. She said, there's still time to trust her.
Yeah.
And,
nice. Yeah, I love that.
And it was like exactly what I needed to hear, right? And so I just okay. I said, I wanted to do MI. I guess this is the ride I'm going to get. And within like an hour or two, she went back down into the nest, and then she did that every day. Almost every day, she'd come out, heat herself up.
Yeah.
She would get her skin temperature up to 100 degrees.
Yeah.
And then go back down in the nest. And I had a little Govee in there, and you could see the temperature and humidity spikes and everything. And I had a little camera in there, so I could see exactly what she was doing. When she'd be wrapping them tightly, when she'd be leaving her coils a little bit open to regulate humidity and so forth. And and oh my God, it was so friggin' cool.
So awesome.
So
I'm getting like chills just hearing about it.
Oh my gosh,
so freaking cool.
So to your question, Phil, like, what else did she do? Like, so okay, that ball of eggs that is now all glued together, over and over and over again. You hear, you cannot turn a snake egg or it will die. Right? Like, go on almost any YouTube breeder channel, and you take out each egg, you label it so you know which side is up, you put it in the vermiculite, and you do not touch it or that baby is going to die. Right? Well, so Bobby goes in the nest, and when she's wrapping this ball of eggs, she's not just like making like you're coiling a rope on top. She's getting all the way underneath it, and she is becoming like a shell around this whole ball of eggs, right? And as she's doing that, she's totally turning it. So I had pictures every day when she would leave the nest of, today the eggs are in this orientation. The next day the eggs are in this orientation. The next day they're in this orientation. And the same thing, I'm like, oh, she killed them. They're dead. And
that's so funny. That's something I heard about. I'm pretty sure I heard that almost 30 years ago about lizard eggs. Yeah. And then I remember somebody kind of telling me like, hey, I think that might be nonsense. Like, I don't remember, again, I don't remember the exact timeline, but it was a long time ago. And then I saw a video, again, a very long time ago, of a bearded dragon breeder who was like taking their bearded dragon eggs out of the nest that had been buried in the ground, tossing them around like marbles, and then rinsing them off in water and then putting them in the vermiculite. What? And they all would hatch just fine. And I'm like, okay, I think this is nonsense, Another one was a buddy of mine. I won't say who because I don't want to get him in trouble. He found 2 eggs while herping in the South and brought them home in his carry-on bag.
Wow.
From South to Colorado, and they hatched. They were little turtles, and they hatched. And I'm like, dude, come on. You can move around the eggs like it's no big deal at all.
Wow.
Like, turn them, tilt them, toss them. Don't, you don't have to, don't shake them,
Right.
Yeah.
But that one doesn't, it's such a funny thing that myth still floats around out there and people tout it like it's like truth. It's so weird.
And scientists know that it's not true, right?
Yeah.
So that's a weird thing. Why is that still so persistent in the hobby? When ask anybody who studies snakes, or at least who studies snakes that lay eggs. Actually, I should back it up even more. Studies pythons, because I don't know about other eggs, but so studies pythons where they do wrap the eggs and move them around and all of that stuff. They all know that that's not true, right? So why does that persist in the hobby? I don't know.
I have a theory about this. So the little pet theory I have is that if there are so many mistakes that happen in herpetoculture, right? Roy and I, before the show, we were just talking about Polycris peruvianus, right? Because he just got eggs from his. Big ups to Roy. That's a big deal. And he was talking about how, for a lot of the people that he's talked to, the first clutch that they tend to incubate just doesn't work out for whatever reason, okay. Right? And so, okay, fine. I think that's normal enough, and it happens often enough that obviously I'm not referring to the people who Roy was talking about with the Polycris peruvianus. I'm just saying broadly in herpetoculture, all those kinds of small errors and mistakes and things add up, and people think, and you're trying to draw through lines between when something doesn't work and when it does, right? Because you're trying to improve your methods all the time. So I think that for some individuals, falling back on finding a reason that instead of looking at, it's not necessarily a flaw, but, maybe I can get a little more granular and a little more particular here, more specific to my purview, which is uromastics, right? People will so often say, these eggs didn't hatch, they weren't fertile, the male didn't mate with her, I didn't cool them right. None of that is the case. It is almost always the case that there was some other factor, some larger factor, like you were housing them together for too long, the female was under too much stress for too much time while she was carrying the eggs, the nesting wasn't right, she held them too long. It's much more likely to be something like that than something like you turned the eggs when you took them out of the nesting box. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. But it's in a, and then, because then what happens is you get like you're not confirmation bias, but the next year you don't turn the eggs and they all hatch. And you think, see, I didn't turn the eggs. It's just like when you have like athletes who have those weird luck rituals. They put their socks on the same way. I didn't have my lucky rabbit's foot for me for this fight, so I lost by knockout. Like it was the rabbit's foot. I think it's the same kind of thing in herpetoculture, is that we attribute cause to things that were not causal at all, or in fact might not have been even it's just not even in the cards to have affected the outcome. But we have a tendency to attribute cause to these things that are not causal, right? So that's what I think. That's why I think those kinds of myths persist, is because there's so many other broad mistakes that are contributing to lack of success, I think. What do you?
No, I totally agree. Right? Like if you listen to python breeders, they're obsessed.
Yeah.
Again, I don't want to make it sound like everybody's the same, but you hear it over and over and over again. People are really, really focused on like half a degree of difference in the incubator.
It's chaos. That's straight chaos.
And the reason is because it's like, well, that's the only variable that you're controlling.
Yeah.
And so that must be the thing that's causal, right?
Yeah.
No,
it's not. Not at all.
Yeah.
No, it's an interesting thing, and again, I don't at all begrudge people for having that particular perspective. I've had it too. There have been times when I thought like, it must have been this, it must have been that, but it takes a little time, and a little bit of experience.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Before you start to recognize, hey, I don't really think that was it. It couldn't have been that because of, reasons X, Y, or Z. But I also think, it's kind of bold to go that way in a way, because when someone will ask, I've never bred this species. You got any advice? And the first thing I'll say is just look to other people who did it and try to replicate, right? It doesn't mean that you're always trying to copy people. It just means that you're trying to learn. It's wisdom, right? You're trying to learn from the experience of other people. Yeah. So for the first time, that you bred these snakes, and all of a sudden you said that they were mating, and then she laid the eggs, and I had made the decision I was going to do MI. Like that's a relatively bold move, I guess I would say, for the first time ever doing it, and so I don't know. I'm just sort of curious, like, other than just, that initial reaction that you had, that you described earlier, that went something like, well, why wouldn't you just let them incubate on their own? What other bits of calculus went into deciding, actually, I am going to go with this? Like, I think this is the way to go.
I'm not sure I really know how to answer that, because as you were talking, I was just reflecting on, like, I really didn't feel like it was that bold.
Okay.
I really didn't. I felt like I had enough information. I guess this goes back to that thing that we were talking about, like, if you learn how to learn.
Yeah.
I felt like, okay, I know enough to have a broad idea of what the parameters should be.
Yeah.
And I know enough to be able to provide those parameters consistently. And I've done enough research to get an idea of what's a realistic expectation of what a maternally incubating python, because I couldn't really research scrubs because there's like no research on them. But, if you look at Morelia, they're pretty close.
Right.
Or even retics.
Yeah.
I had a pretty good idea of like what her behavior might hopefully be. And then I had the incubator as a backup if I needed to. But I felt like, I guess it's just like the courage, having the courage of your convictions. Is that the phrase?
Yeah.
That, like, okay, I know those things. As far as I can tell, those things are true. So then if I'm right, then this should go okay. And if it doesn't, I've got this backup plan. So, I guess it just really, it didn't feel like, it didn't feel like, it was scary while it was happening, or scary is not the right word. I worried a lot. But it didn't feel like, I didn't feel like it was any less safe to do it that way, because people get shitty clutches of scrubs all the time.
Right.
And just because if I hadn't done MI, or made it, just a bunch of other things that I've done, if I hadn't done those, I don't feel like I would have been any more likely to have a good result.
Yeah.
I just would have had, I would have been on a safer path, a path that, people like to be on the same path that other people are on because it makes them feel safe. And so I would have had the reassurance, but I didn't feel like really it was going to make, it was, I couldn't look at those things and say, yes, if I do those things are more likely to turn it right.
Right. And there's even like a poetic irony in it too, right? Which is that like more clutches of scrub eggs have been successfully hatched through maternal incubation than will ever be hatched in herpetoculture and incubators.
Right.
But I also totally get. But I just to kind of play the other side of that is like totally understand that the main thing that people will say is like, well, but we're doing it here and they're doing it there, right? So and in my mind, something you said made a lot of sense to me, which is the part about how well, I'll just trust in my convictions and I'll just go with that, right? When I'm working with something where there's like very little information and, like, for example, I had these sandfish, and I got 2 or 3 clutches of sandfish eggs. And each time I was like, all right, well, let's try it this way. Let's see what happens when we incubate them this way. And I didn't really sweat. I didn't care at the end of the day. I'm not, with the hingeback tortoise eggs that I just got, I've never incubated tortoise eggs. So I'm kind of like, all right, we'll just give it a roll. And if it doesn't work, I don't really care that much. And it's not, it's not because, in my case anyway, it's just because I'm thinking like, well, there's probably a range with it. If I just hit, I'm not really trying to, a lot of times people think they're trying to hit like a bullseye, and you're not. You're really trying to hit like the outer portion of the bullseye, really, because there's a broad range of temperature and humidity gradients where stuff will survive just fine. Like it'll hatch, it'll do its thing. This is true of probably lots and lots and lots of reptiles and various animals, right? So on some level, I have this, when it's something like that, it's like, well, let's just see if it works. But if it was something like an Ackie, right, where tons of people have produced them, I'd probably be more inclined to be like, I'm going to go with this. I'm going to try to find the best, the top 3 people who I think are doing the best work with Ackie. I'm just going to mimic whatever they're doing, not because I'm, and again, it does make me feel much more safe to go with what I think is a method that I've seen work before. But it's also like, once I'm doing it and it's happening more regularly, okay, now I feel more free to experiment. But when it's something that there's like no documentation or like nobody's even done it, or very, very few people have done it, then it's like, I don't know. I feel for some reason in that context, I feel much more free to experiment because I feel like I'm not going off as much on a beaten path. I'm trying to say like, well, somebody's got to figure this out, right? And get it a little more dialed in. Now, there's obviously plenty of people who have hatched hingebacks. That's not what I'm saying. It's just with sex, it was a totally different thing. But if maybe bold is a little too much, but if I was in your shoes and I knew I had a scrub python that was gravid and I was expecting eggs, I probably would have researched around, found the handful of people who have done it. And then just because of the way my mind works, I would have pulled the eggs and I would have incubated similarly to the way that other people have incubated and gotten modest success. And I would have said, they probably had other problems that were causing the lack of success, because it seems fair to me that, if you're doing all the other stuff right, then the eggs will hatch. They're just probably going to hatch, man. Again, if you're not hitting a bullseye, you're hitting a broad spectrum. And so in some ways, it sounds like you had a lot of confidence that all your other dials were tuned correctly and were where they needed to be. So you were able, you were able to give a lot more trust to the animal and say, she's got a lot of resources. So
exactly.
I'm just going to allow this to happen the way that she thinks is best, because she's got lots of places, there's a lot of range here. There's a lot of controls in place, and I'm losing my train of thought a little bit. I'd love to hear some reactions to that.
I mean, people were very generous with their time and advice and told me how they did it. Not doing MI, but just what their keeping parameters were, what their incubation parameters were, and so forth.
Yeah.
And it wasn't anything super exotic, right?
Yeah, it can't be.
So I mean, I guess in that sense, then it's not a big step to go from, okay, well, you're doing that in a converted cooler to, I can pretty much provide that in a cage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, she can tweak it as she needs to.
Right.
But, like there weren't any really exotic, nothing esoteric about it.
I used to, this is gonna make some people feel a little weird, I'm sure. I used to incubate Euromastix eggs in racks because I had all these old rack systems that I used to use for, like 15 years ago when I had some various leopard gecko and knobtail geckos. And when I stopped doing that, because I just didn't really want to rack keep anymore, I was like, I could still use these racks. And I was like, I just use them as an incubator. But that's the same thing. That would be like if you got a leopard gecko egg and it laid an egg in a nest box and you just leave it in the damn nest box and it'll hatch probably, right?
Yeah.
It's the same kind of idea. It's like this is just a contained space that holds temperature and humidity. There's really no difference between this and a nest box where there's a mother snake in there messing with the eggs. It's really the same. It's so not a big risk. Like
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Same deal, right? That's so cool, man. And by the way, for if there's other people listening who are as idiotic as I am, MI is maternal incubation, just for the record, because I had to infer that. I was like, oh, they must be.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm just throwing it out there because I'm sure someone else is like, am I? Like, what?
Yeah, thanks for that, Phil.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Birds,
Isn't that a heart attack?
Yeah, myocardial infarction. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more. So what happened when they hatched? Like, how did that all go? What was give us some highlight?
Okay, first of all, it was adorable.
Yeah, of course.
Like,
how could it not be?
It was super adorable. Roy, I know you've seen some of the photos and video. I don't know if Phil, if you've seen any, but they're ridiculously cute.
Yeah.
And it was about a 3-day process for
how long was the gestation too?
Like about 80 days. I think just under 80 days.
Okay.
And so as a new dad, you'll appreciate this. For the week or so before the eggs hatched, there are all sorts of super cool things about it. Okay, so the week or so before the eggs hatched, Bobby started twitching differently in the nest box.
Cool. Weird.
And it reminded me of when my son would kick my wife in the ribs before he was born.
Yeah.
And so she was twitching and moving differently than she had for the entire previous, however many weeks. Right. And so that was really cool. Like, okay, I don't know what sensory input she's getting, but it's only coming from one place.
Yeah, sure.
So it was so cool to have a camera in the nest box. And then the day that the day the baby started pipping, so Bobby's in this enclosure, Amos, the dad, is in this one, the lower one. The day that the baby started pipping, Amos just went nuts. And
whoa, that's cool.
It was so cool. He's like looking in all of the little hides and stuff in his enclosure where he never goes. He's not interested in them at all. But that day and that day only, he's just going bonkers.
Wow.
So that was wild. And then basically, so for 3 days, while she would not let them out of the eggs. So they would like stick their nose out, and at first she would let them come out a little bit, but maybe an inch or so. But then before long, they were getting bolder and they were coming out further, and she would just friggin' whack them with a coil.
Oh wow!
And she wasn't gentle about it either.
Whoa!
And sometimes she just hit them with her tail, and it was always like, there's 14 babies or 15 at that point, and she would only hit the one that was getting lippy, that was really pushing the limits. And again, like at first I was like, oh my God, this isn't good. She's beating her children. But they didn't seem to mind, and you could see the change in behavior over time, that they got more and more insistent on coming out. And she eventually was so tired from managing them that she's like lying on her side with her head sideways. Like she never lies like that ever. But she just like completely wrung out. And eventually she sort of got her head out of the nest, and she's looking up into the rest of the cage, and the babies are crawling over her head to get out over the course of a few hours. And she's watching them disappear up into the foliage. And I mean, it was a really profound experience to get to watch that. It was super cool. And then there was one baby left in the nest who had some pretty severe deformities, and it wasn't able to get out. And so she stayed with that baby for a day. And the baby tried to get out and just couldn't do it. And so eventually she left, and immediately shed like in 10 minutes.
Wow.
And she hadn't shed, since her prelay shed. And then she was done, right? Like it was another one of those really, just to me just watching that, and I just found it really moving. She goes through this 3-month process of doing this every second of every day, and then she's done, and she literally casts off her exterior. She's this new being, and it was so cool. If I had to,
she's just like done and done.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I wonder about that. I'm not sure that that's true. That was sort of, that was the narrative. That was the narrative that I took away from it. Like, she had to leave her last baby, but she knows the other ones are safe. And so now she can go on. I don't know. If I'd had it to do over again, I would have built the cage in a way that would have been safe to leave the babies in there for a few weeks. But as in this case, I pulled the babies once they left the nest and put them in their own enclosure. But it'd be really interesting to see what sort of maternal care, if any, there would have been after the fact.
Yeah.
Wow.
Totally.
So interesting. And it was, how many, did they all hatch? It was how many? Okay. Except for the one.
Yep.
Before?
Yeah, they all hatched. And that one we had to put it down because it was too badly deformed.
Sure.
Oh, okay. Here's another reason people say don't do MI, because remember the big ball of eggs?
Yeah.
The people worry that the eggs on the bottom, those babies are not going to be able to get out.
Right.
It was amazing. The eggs that were in the very middle, they were glued to the surrounding eggs by, 90% of their surface.
Yeah.
Those babies knew where that little spot was, where it wasn't glued to anything.
So cool.
That's where they cut.
Yeah.
And that's where they went out.
That's awesome.
That's so amazing.
Really cool. Really cool. I love that. That's really,
isn't that?
Yeah.
There's been a number of studies that have talked about, communication between reptiles and eggs. But I just thought that was I just love that.
Yeah. It's really so cool.
Really, really cool. Interesting. And so all the babies are crushing it, huh?
So yeah, they're all, there's 3 of them that still haven't eaten on their own. So they're just over 3 months old now. Which I think is not that unusual. Most of them are established in the sense of being ready to go off to new homes, but they're great. And they're, it's really interesting. They're very mellow. Yeah. They are, except for one, Scoville. He's named after the rating of how spicy peppers are.
Scoville complex.
Yeah. That one is spicy, but all the rest of them are just fine with. It's not like they love being handled, but they're totally fine with it. And if I stick my hand in the cage, every single one will come over and check me out and climb on my hand. And
that's so cool.
They're being cohabbed in 3 different cages. So there's 5, 5, and 4 in these different cages. So, and they're again blowing my mind because they're really, really social. They snuggle up all the time. And they've got plenty of room to get away from each other and plenty of duplicated resources all over the place. It's not a competing for resources thing at all. That I can tell anyway. So a lot of times you'll see 3 or 4 of them, just all in one, little bundle all together. Super cool.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Really cool. That's fun stuff. It's the kind of thing that, that's like the whole point, right? Is to just enjoy the great moments and learn new things and see the animals just living their best life. It's great.
It's very rewarding. Yeah,
for sure. I love that. So something I'm a little curious about too is what is are you just planning to do this again in the future and do this with other stuff? Was this sort of a one-off? Was breeding always your intent?
I mean, I'm totally not a breeder. I'm a keeper, to the extent that there's that.
Now you're a breeder for sure.
I don't know. It's been really, really fun and really rewarding. It's also been a ton of work, and I wouldn't want to do it in a way that I wouldn't really be interested in doing it in a way that where like I'm just taking all the babies out and sticking them each in a drawer in a rack. Like that doesn't really sound like very much fun to me. So if I were going to do it again, I would need to make sure that I really had the time to dedicate to it like I have this time. Although that said, there's a bunch of lessons learned where I think I would find some efficiencies and it would be easier to do again.
Right.
Mm-hmm. But I'm not really sure how much I want to see scrubs become popular. Mm-hmm. They're big.
Yeah.
And they're super climbing.
Right.
And so I don't feel like they're hard to keep, but these cages, the shared cage here is 7 wide, 3.5 or 7 wide, just under 3 deep, and 7 tall, split between the two of them. And I feel like that's not big enough.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So even though they get, the only thing that makes that work is that they get time outside of the cage.
Yeah.
But so like, I just feel like I'm really ambivalent about them being as popular as they are now, because like, I just feel like they're going to wind up these guys spent the first 7 years of their life each in a 4x2x2, not even a full one.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not good with that.
Yeah.
So, so I don't know. We'll see.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah. Well, that kind of brings us to kind of like just zooming out more broadly. And I'd like to ask you some questions about just kind of like your impressions of herpetoculture more generally and your kind of keeping style more generally. And Maybe we can kind of begin there. And you already kind of spoke to this and alluded to it a little bit, but like what is your drive as a keeper? It sounds like you're very behavior, kind of natural history driven.
Yeah.
Does that feel true?
Totally. Yeah, very much so. Yeah. Like I was going to say, do I think morph for the devil?
I'll get Phil started on that one.
I'm happy to talk about it. Admittedly, I'm always happy to talk about that
one. Yeah, no, that's the part about it that's been fun for me. Just seeing, like I keep saying, like seeing them do natural things and seeing them in the closest to a natural setting that I'm able to provide them. Right. I guess the other thing that really drives me though from it is more like what I've learned from it just as a person, which is mostly patience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure.
They don't do anything in a hurry until they really do, but when that's going to happen. And over and over and over again, what almost always, like whenever I've had a something that I'm worried about or concerned about or unsure about with any of the snakes, patience is always at least a component of the answer. And that's one of those profound teachings. Like, it's easy to say, but like in the actual practice of it, when it's something that you really care about and you really want to address it quickly because you're a mammal and you're a primate, and we're all about solutions right now.
Immediate return.
Yeah. And so to like let go of that and try and actually meet them where they are, that's been really, I didn't really know that I was going to get that out of it when I started doing this. But I really love that.
So do you actually think morphs with the devil? Do you actually?
Morphs? Yeah, fuck, I hate morphs. No, okay. So here's the I hate the thing about that snakes are Pokemon cards. Like, and the thing of especially when there's ball pythons and retics are the easiest ones to pick on with this, right? Where there's just like jillions of them kept poorly, and there's a giant oversupply because people are chasing morphs, and so you have just this enormous bycatch, for lack of a better term, pos hats, and that's not. I really feel for those animals, right? Like they're not going to have great lives, most of them. So yeah, I guess so. Yeah, that's why I think morphs are the devil. Just because of what it does to the marketplace, and it encourages overproduction, and it encourages people to think of living animals as Pokemon cards or checks in a bingo card or something.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's a tough one to reconcile.
I could try to reconcile it, but I'm not. To me, it sounds more of like a hate the game, not the player, right? Like, don't hate the player, hate the game, right? In some way, that's kind of what I think of it, is because it's like the way that people. But I'm not trying to. Just for the record, I'm like not trying to persuade you otherwise. I'm just I just think it's one of those things where I can easily envision a world of ball pythons and retics where morphs are present, where that's not happening. I don't think that's too big of a stretch. However, I don't think you can unwind it, right? Like once, not to justify that. I'm saying that even though I can imagine a world in which it looks differently, doesn't mean that we can turn. I can't convince everybody to change the methodology. I think there are other factors that contribute to the way that I think if you had the same morphological variety, but without the ease of production and the high rate of production in some of these animals, like a leopard gecko or a bearded dragon, and if there was an inability to keep them in those situations, whether just purely practical or ethical, legislative restraint on keeping that way, I think all of that kind of disappears in a way. Or at the very least, it changes frames. You're not looking. It's not the same circumstance, because there are other animals in which morphs exist that you don't have that same thing, because the animals don't lend themselves to the same method of care,
Like, what are you thinking of in particular?
Oh, take like the white form of the Varanus kingorum. Everybody calls them leucistics, but they look like albinos. You have those. You have a few varieties of Lacerta, the green Lacerta. There's a few mutations of those that they just can't be kept that way. So that, they're not in the same abundance. I think green iguanas are like that in some regard, because the morphs of those, like, there are morphs and there are people, both ethically and otherwise chasing those morphs, but you can't keep a green iguana in a in a box and like that. You can't keep them in a rack. So it doesn't lend itself to the same kind of high production value, And so I too dislike vehemently the way that stuff gets treated. And that's again, you were right in saying that like ball pythons and retics are kind of like the slim picking or the easy pickings. Like that's like it's just so easy for crested geckos. We had Alan Rapace on one of the last shows where he was talking about just the level of production that he was putting into this stuff and producing thousands of animals a month. And Alan, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I know he has spoken previously about his sort of misgivings on where that's all gone. But I have a strong conviction that a lot of it is made possible by some of these other features of the animal. Whether it's you look like a leopard gecko, you can keep those things people can house those things in subpar conditions for a long time, and they'll do modestly well, and you can do it at scale. And they'll produce high numbers of animals, and the turnover rate's really, really fast. And so I think all of that stuff contributes in some way to the way that it stacks and just kind of exponentially grows in a way that I think if you transmorph that onto ball pythons, retics, corn snakes, it just the picture would look different. I think it would look a little different. We'd probably have fewer of them. A smaller number of them. I tend to be on a sort of a bit of a middle ground here because, you guys all know that I have some Uromastyx mutations that I'm working with and putzing around with. But that's another great example. It's like you could never, good luck trying to mass produce a Uromastyx.
Right.
I've been trying, not actually to mass produce it, but I've been trying for 15 years and I can only produce so many, and if I was able to if I were that kind of person and I were able to house them differently and they cranked out a lot more and they, bred at 8 months to a year old, something like this, I think things would look a little bit different. I also think there's probably counterexamples to that, right? Because you look at like a sulcata tortoise, there's morphs of sulcata, but the market for sulcata isn't built on the morphology, right? It's not built on that, but you can crank sulcata tortoises and make thousands of them without the morph market, and it can kind of go in an opposite direction where it's like, this is also kind of crummy in some ways, but I also think that it's like, it's kind of complicated. I think there's lots of other features that contribute to what make them so easily disposable in some ways, which is pretty unfortunate. I had one more thing. Shit, I lost it. It was right at the end of this sulcata thing. I was gonna make another point about something, but I forgot. Sorry. Damn it. I gotta give me a second. I swear it'll come back to me. Shit. Yeah, you guys keep going. I'll just. Okay. I'm gonna see it. Not because again, I'm not trying to change your mind or anything. It's just.
No, it's fine.
Just the stuff I think about,
Yeah.
Damn it.
Well, I mean, it's interesting to think about like what motivates people to want to acquire an animal and then what motivates them to want to care for it well over time.
Right. For sure.
Mm-hmm.
So that was it too. You can, oh God, did I lose it again? It was about, I was going down the road of like, the wild type thing. So, when we just slide money into the conversation, that changes a lot, right? Because obviously you have individuals that are going to be motivated by money, which I think is okay. I think there's a range in which monetary motivation can come in depending on what you're doing, as long as it's done in an ethical fashion. But like, people will say, well, the money is what drives the morph market. People want to be able to charge like thousands and thousands of dollars for an animal. It's like, well, okay, but people do that with rare stuff. You know what I mean? Like you could, Polychrus peruvianus, we were just talking about before, Boland's pythons, whatever it is. they don't have to have a mutation for the money to be driving it in the first place either, and so I feel like you know, when we're talking about if we're going to have that choice, because I think about it like, if I'm a little kid and I'm going to go to the store to get my first pet lizard, and I see that I can get a leopard gecko, and then I can choose between these 30 different color varieties of a leopard gecko, that's extremely interesting. That now we're talking about something that resembles like a dog breed, or what color hamster, guinea pig, parrot, and yeah, I'm totally here for the conversation that looks at that product. Is it product? Treat, you can turn the animal into a product, and I get that too. That I totally understand that critique, right? But I also think there's got to be some in between stage, where you go from like, we have wolf dogs like Roy, and when I choose to go get a dog, I'm going to pick a golden retriever over a Chihuahua because I don't like Chihuahuas, but I still want a dog, And I think that same choice that's what's happening in herpetoculture. We're getting to the point where we can have that same choice. And obviously, I'll reiterate that I have a big problem with what you described as bycatch, which I think is a great way to describe it. When you have all this leftover animal product, basically living animals that are this like leftover product from the pursuit of certain things, that by all means, that's a problem, and one that needs addressing. So none of this is to excuse that at all. It's just to say that, because I don't like that either. But, I also think it is probably a net good at the end of the day when 150, 200 years into the future, when things are a little bit more, systematized, there's a more established, institutionalized nature of herpetoculture in the same way we have an institutionalized nature of cats, dogs, guinea pigs, or whatever, any other kind of domestic animal. And so I think that the route to getting there should look ethical by all means. But I also am totally in favor of being able to buy a green, blue, and turquoise lizard, or maybe my favorite color is yellow, and I'm going to go for the yellow one. Like I think there's a way for it all to coexist. But again, I say all of this with a lot of distaste for some of the ways that people are getting there, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
That was a long-winded way. Sorry. I work out a lot of my thought process and the things I'm trying to understand. It happens externally. I verbalize. That's just how my brain.
Yeah. I think when my mouth is moving.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
If I'm lucky.
Yeah. Hopefully in a perfect world, I'm thinking clearly when my mouth is moving, but yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Not always.
I mean, you guys talk about the domestication of reptiles, or in the golden retriever sense.
I do.
From time. Yeah.
Thanks for the correction there. No.
Probably, I don't know how much Roy wants to be. Anyway, keep going. I'm sorry.
I generally I am in favor of that, in the sense that I think. So the reason that I bought these two scrubs as opposed to other ones was because Dan Maleri from DM Exotics, guy who imported them, he had them, and he was like, okay, here's the thing about these two scrubs. They're chill.
Okay.
And they don't look, they're just like straight up normal wild type. They're not, I think they're really pretty, but they're nothing unusual, right? And they're not, if you're talking to scrub aficionados who are just like looking at them, they'll just be like, yeah, they're okay. But temperament wise, and they're still scrubs, but they're pretty calm. Like I've never had either one of them try and do any kind of defensive bite or anything like that at all. And so when I was thinking about like, okay, if I wanted to breed scrubs, what's going to be in the interest of the babies that I produce? Like, what's going to set them up for good lives? And more than anything, I think it's going to be, it's not going to be like how pretty they are or that, I mean, because that influences whether somebody buys them. But that thing about like how somebody keeps them well is if they feel safe with that animal and that animal is okay at being with them, right? Mm-hmm. And leaving aside all of the things of like the keeping parameters and everything, I'm just talking about temperament.
Yeah.
I think that makes an enormous difference in somebody's experience of keeping an animal. You know, and it's really, and like things like Instagram and everything make it really easy to de-emphasize that because it doesn't come across in the photograph. But in terms of like what really matters, like, okay, yeah, you think you're like, you get together with your spouse and you're first attracted to them because they're hot, but you stay with them because you love them, right? Mm-hmm. And they make you happy and you make them happy, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why I picked these animals, and that's why I'm trying to socialize these babies as much as I possibly can as well. Because I think that that's going to set them up for a successful lifetime in captivity. And that spicy one, Scoville, he's going to, God.
Fucking does that by itself.
Scoville.
I did do it for me. That's great.
Yeah. Scoville. Scoville is going to a friend of mine who's good with that temperament, right? He's and who already keeps a number of hands-off species and doesn't have that agenda for that particular animal. And so, you know, I mean, that's something that's exciting to me in herpetoculture generally. Like you're asking about the what am I thinking about in a bigger picture? I feel like there's getting to be a little bit more room in the conversation about for people who are keeping, and particularly for newer people who are keeping, that just general sort of quality over quantity, right? Mm-hmm. Like keeping a couple animals really well rather than keeping 15 or 50 of them or whatever poorly, and really optimizing for good temperament and good what's the right word? Temperamental herpetoculture. I don't know. I'm not really sure what the right word is, but seeing the animals clearly for who they are, being willing to keep them in a way that works for them, and also hopefully choosing breeding stock that's going to provide more of those animals rather than ones who are just going to be super, super stressed out, not lead happy lives during the short time they're here because they get traded around all of the time and nobody likes them. Right.
Yeah, totally.
Absolutely. Yeah. Couldn't agree more with that.
Yeah, it's really interesting too. I mean, because it's interesting to be able to hear you describe like individual temperaments of, you know, some of these hatchlings that you're raising. And for if you're breeding it like really large scale, it's just you can't have that kind of awareness necessarily about every single kind of animal, right? And so it's a really cool different take on the hobby, and it's also really cool to like be, you know, communicating with potential new owners about like, well, what's the kind of temperament you're looking for in your animal?
Exactly.
Or does this kind of temperament bother you? Which is something that is common practice with other kinds of animals. Like I'm thinking about like, you know, when we got Dalva, our wolf dog, we were in communication with the breeder for, you know, over a month before we even went and visited the dog. And we already had an idea of which dog was going to be right for us before we even got there, just just based on her experience with those puppies every single day for 12 hours a day, and then talking to us and hearing about our lifestyle and our circumstances. And she's like, okay, I think that you're probably going to want one of these 2 puppies.
Yeah.
And so
don't tell Dalva she's a wolf dog. She's just a pure wolf, dude.
Yeah, I tell her every day, she's my little wolfy girl.
100%.
She knows.
Yeah.
She was out on top of the truck a minute ago howling. And it's not, I can hear it really well, but it doesn't pick up on the mic. But she almost every night she goes up on top of the truck. She climbs up on the top of the cab and just howls.
Okay, you have to put that on Instagram. I would love to see that.
Yeah. I'll send you some videos, Paul. Yeah.
But dude, that's so cool.
It's pretty fun. But the whole thing with that is it's cool to see that kind of awareness being extended toward herps, because I think that there is because they are further away from us, right? And like on like the evolutionary tree, it's harder for us to empathize with them, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that in many ways, that's part of the disconnect, right? That you're kind of speaking to that you find troubling, right? Of like the kind of collector mindset with herps and kind of, there's almost a kind of like, I think I've heard Francis Koskiri refer to this as like the opposite of anthropomorphism is like mechanomorphism.
Yeah, that's right.
And that can kind of happen sometimes, and so it's like there's, it's a spectrum, right? And like anthropomorphism can cause certain harms, right? And cause us to bypass actually being able to accurately see our animals. Yep. But so can the other side of the spectrum, right? So can mechanomorphism obscure our ability to actually see these creatures that we're working with. Yeah. So it's cool to hear you trying to approach it in that way. And it's also, I mean, it makes sense too, coming from where you did, and just like in your whole story, that you shared about how you started keeping them and choosing to do MI, that you're being guided by like your own values, and your own kind of trust in the animals. In some ways, I think that makes sense because you're coming into this as a mature adult human being, and you're not necessarily being like fully kind of groomed into a certain set of perspectives that represent the mainstream, right? Mm-hmm. Not to say that that's like a nefarious active process that's necessarily happening within herpetoculture, but just that's a byproduct of anything where there's mainstream, norms and expectations, and coming into the practice, in a different stage of life where you can you're already more confident questioning those kinds of things. And it makes a lot of sense how that's translating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well said.
Try to.
Well, it's cool to hear. I'm curious, again, with that kind of broad view, are there like certain things you see in herpetoculture that like have you really excited, or are there certain kind of like frontiers in herpetoculture? I mean, we're kind of already speaking to this, but curious if there's anything more that you see out there as like, this feels like an untapped area, or
I mean, I guess along those lines, so you guys know the big ball python breeder Canova?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're actually doing temperament testing for people who are buying, if that's something that they're interested in. And they are, you can pay like a nominal fee. It's not very much, to have that baby raised in an enclosure and get socialization. They can even do target training, all of that stuff before you get that snake.
Yeah.
And I just think that's awesome. Like, so here you have like this huge industrial breeder who is, they're commercially differentiating themselves by doing something that is ethical, and it's in the interest of the animal, and it's in the interest of the keeper. Yeah. Like it's a win-win-win just all across the board. Yeah. I think that's just fantastic. That's like,
I agree with you. And, you know, something that came to mind when Roy was talking a minute ago too, is that, you know, a non-zero, and by non-zero, I mean like 60% of the people who come to me looking for a Uromastyx, one of the questions you get all the time is how friendly are they? You know, and you know, I work with, you know, the hatchlings that every hatchling I get gets interaction with me and with Brendan, my shop guy. Like they're getting interaction all the time, whether it's through feeding or when we're cleaning their enclosure or whatever it is. But I always remind people like, hey, context matters. You know, when the animal changes homes, you might have a completely different animal for a little while. And so then the conversation becomes, you know, these are 30+ year lifespan lizards, depending on the species. What's a year or two of trust building to a 30-year lifespan? It's really not that big of a deal. And, you know, you try to encourage people to think about it a little bit more like a dog, where, yeah, maybe the first 2 years of my dog's life are the ones where the most training and trust building between me and that dog are going to develop. But that training, that work together never stops. That's a lifetime. It's constant. It's always going to be a part of the equation. And if you slack on it, you're going to see the results. It's, you know, if you have cats, if you don't play with your cats, they're going to tear up your shit. You know? That's just the way they are. They're going to get what they need. And it's, you know, and speaking again to what Roy was saying, is they're a little bit more relatable because they're mammals and we grow up with them and they're a part of us. But a lot of that has to happen in reptiles too. You know, I think it's interesting that it kind of doesn't surprise me that one of the largest ball python producers is doing something like that, because if you think about it from a business perspective, if the market is flooded and people are having a hard time moving snakes, they have to find other avenues for revenue, and you have to start appealing to you know, at some point you have to make a shift and say, all right, well, you know, we have all these animals now, we got to find homes for them. So we have to find a way to make it viable to get them into homes. And we have to, you know, so that there's maybe like a, you know, sort of like the business angle of it. But I agree with you. It's really good to see someone who's such a prominent figure in that particular niche taking a stance that says, I'm going to do this, and I don't care if it costs me, or if, you know, if I'm going to pass that cost on to you or whatever it is. Like, this is something that it should happen, and it's a good thing to do. So I think about breeders who, you know, allow people to do what's that thing where you send the shed in and it tells you what sex the animal is, right?
Genetics, yeah,
that's it. I love that, and I also think I relate it a little bit to when people do testing for certain pathogens in their
exactly. Yep,
really akin to that. Yeah, go ahead, please.
No, I mean, it's exactly that. Like, I'm agreeing.
Yeah, okay. I was just wanting to make sure I didn't talk over you or something, you know.
No.
But, you know, I think all of this stuff is a pretty important thing. We've had a handful of other guests on the show that actually, I think it was the one I'm thinking of. I'm pretty sure is Bill Strand, where we're talking about like this sort of a small batch, you know, artisanal breeder. As a bit of an answer to the more commercial industrial breeder, you know, and I think it's a great step forward, because actually, again, another person who's been on the show, Brian Susan, I was just on the phone with him last week, and we were talking about what it really means. You know, if you're like producing an animal like a tree monitor or a scrub python or a Uromastyx or something that is rarely bred in captivity, you know, has a, you know, let's say anywhere from modest to high demands in terms of their maintenance, whatever it is, the whole marketing, if you want to call it that, marketing, the whole angle you're taking there is by buying from someone who is producing these indoors and is doing so and putting their life's work into this. You're getting more than just, it's not just the animal anymore. You know, you're getting lifetime consultation on how to deal with that animal and how to care for that animal. You're getting the knowledge of where that animal comes from. You're getting health guarantees. You're getting a lot more information on that animal than you would if you just bought from an importer, right? So, I think finding any ways that we can to continue to push that and split ourselves off in a way from just the average importer,
Yeah.
So I love this conversation because it really is something else that came to mind, and I'm going to just deviate. This is totally. This is going to harken back to something else we were talking about in the conversation because that's the way my weird brain works. But Phil Tremper has that kind of famous answer to our closer question, which the why herpetoculture question, that he says it's a disease. And I know that Roy and I have had conversations about this topic, and it's come up on the show before, that on some level, as we push so much of the natural world away from us in our cities and our suburbs, that in some ways herpetoculture and other kinds of animal keeping practices are like a tool to bring that back into our lives, right? It's and I think in some ways, when it really turns into a disease, as Phil so eloquently put, is when it turns into the more industrial mechanomorphism side of things, when it starts to edge into this. Now it's more of a dysfunction. We're talking about a natural human inclination that's reached a tipping point where at a certain point along this continuum, now it's unhealthy. Now we're talking about having done something that is detrimental to you and the animal on some level, depending on how it's done, right? Because I've seen lots of industrial stuff that's really above board, but not there's also a lot of shit out there, right? So it's try to loop this all back together if I can. I really think the future of what we do, I use the other domesticated animals as an example all the time. It has to look like the kind of exchange that we're making when we domesticate dogs, horses, chickens, pigs, sheep, right? That was a trade-off, right? I'm going to have this horse, I'm going to feed it all the time, and he's going to help me plow and sow the fields. But we have like a relationship. It's an exchange. And so I've been trying to do a lot of talking on my pages and in all the places where people will listen to me jabber on about bullshit, to talk a lot more about what kind of exchange are we making with the animals that we work with in herpetoculture, and so in exchange for the things that are given up when they come in from the wild, they're not just getting freedom from predators, freedom from hunger, freedom from the elements, whatever it is. It has to be more than that. It has to be, we are also giving them a cooperative relationship, and one that's built on a foundation of trust and understanding. I read this book years and years and years ago, and I just bought it again. It's called Green Iguana, The Ultimate Owner's Manual by James W. Hatfield III. And I know that because it's got the 3 on the book. That's the only reason I find that peculiar. But anyway, that was the first book that I read years ago that really went into detail about like iguana body language and how to read that body language so you could earn the trust of that iguana, And I use all of that. I use it still to this day with the Euros, with my spiny-tailed iguanas, with the tortoises. And I feel like so much of it is just learning how to feel what your animal's feeling. Just pay attention to these fucking things. And they're communicating all the time. They're always shouting out signals to you about what they want and what they don't, and what they prefer and what they don't. And so, yeah, now I'm just, okay, I've been talking for minutes on end. I got to stop.
Let me reel this guy in. What the hell?
Sorry.
Yeah. If only he had a co-host.
Yeah. I know, right? Jeez, if only he had a co-host who knew what he was doing.
Guy to be like, hey, dude, Phil is rambling again. Can you reel this dork in?
Well, I mean, okay, so we are coming up on 2 hours, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. But Paul, do you have space for a couple more questions?
Sure, yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, I'm curious if you have any particular goals, or I don't know if this is even the right word, ambitions, intentions moving forward in herpetoculture. Any wild ideas or aspirations, anything like that? I'm curious. What does the future hold?
I don't.
Great answer.
That's great.
I don't. I like what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I want to just keep doing what, basically about the same scale that I'm doing. And, I like how it is.
Yeah. That's great.
I mean, I guess I do feel an obligation to scrubs as a species, or as a complex of species, that since I've been, to the extent that I'm not really that public of a person, but to the extent that I talk about this stuff in public, I do feel an obligation to try and present as true of a picture of what living with them is like, and what good care for them can look like.
Right.
So it makes me happy to be able to have conversations like this. And I'm always happy to if people want to get in contact with me, I'm happy to chat with them and share any insights that I have and so forth. But I guess I want to do bigger cages for my animals. That's about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. I like that too, because I like that's more of that mature perspective where I don't have great aspirations. I'm happy with what I'm doing right now. That's pretty good.
Yeah, because I feel like what I'm doing right now it's awesome, right? I feel like super satisfied about it. It makes me really happy.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, and there's also there is a learning arc to be experienced in consistency too. It's not.
Oh yeah.
I think that can kind of, I don't know, get overlooked sometimes. Maybe there's so much more maybe dopamine it comes from the new thing, exploring the new thing, figuring the new thing out. But there's another kind of satisfaction that comes from consistency and what I call the process of adaptive management. The tinkering process, the little tweaks here and there, and I feel like really similarly about that. There's certain species and stuff that I'd still love to work with in the future, but for the most part, as it relates to what I'm doing now, it's like I want to just keep doing that and elevating my care as I can as I go, and making little tweaks here and there, but not necessarily doing anything too drastic.
You got to make a project herpetoculture t-shirt that just says adaptive management on it.
Yes. I'll be the only one that wears it.
or just one that says Herpetoculture ?
Oh yeah, fox sakes. Herpetoculture?
I'm never gonna live that down. Son of a bitch.
We're just gonna get you a plucky comic relief baseball cap.
Yeah, there we go.
I'm totally perfect with that. People got to come into Slack. I had a busy day.
But I mean, like to that point of contentment, like the expression. What's the expression that it's a rich person who wants what they have?
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
Right. For sure.
It's also. I mean, there's something that I don't know where it comes from or who said it first or whatever, but that life's not about getting what you want, but about wanting what you have.
That guy's full of shit.
And I love that. I mean, I try to think about that a lot. I think that there's a lot of value to presence and gratitude as a baseline. But
yeah,
absolutely.
That guy never wanted a Ferrari. No, I'm just, I'm just
some of us just want the vehicle that'll get him to point A to point B, man. Like,
I'll tell you right now, I don't want a Ferrari. I can tell you that. I can say that with a great deal of confidence. I have exactly what you said, Roy. I want a car that gets me from A to B. That's it.
It's really cool with a wolf on it.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You know, a 1989 Toyota pickup that's, you know, starts most of the time, not all the time, with a wolf on top.
But admittedly, if Galva was howling on the top of a Lotus Elise, that'd be pretty cool. Like,
That would be cool. The owner might be a little scared about the damage from the claws, but
not if you can afford a Lotus Elise, you can buff it out, dude.
yeah, right. There you go.
That's so stupid. Oh my god.
Anyway,
All right, so let's. How about the last
the closer. Yeah.
I'm sure you know.
Oh god, I've been dreading it.
Well, yeah. Well, don't dread. Why herpetoculture? Why do we do it? Why does it matter? Why does it not matter? What do you think?
You know, okay, so every time I listen to the podcast and somebody gets this question, I'm like, has my answer changed? No. And it's just like, because it's fun.
Okay.
Like, it's really just super simple. I like it. It makes me happy. It's a way to connect to the world.
Yeah. I love
You know,
that. Yeah.
it's super simple.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. It's a way to connect to the world. Yeah, that's a good answer.
Really good.
It doesn't have to be more than that. It can just be that it's fun, that I enjoy it. I mean, I think that there's
rule, dude.
Yeah.
Rule.
Totally.
That's the best answer. Nice.
Yeah. All right. Well,
great convo. This was great.
Yeah, this has been a pleasure.
really
Paul,
enjoyed it.
and yeah,
Absolutely.
we gotta do it again sometime in the future. And
You bet.
where can folks find you on socials, Facebook, Instagram, that kind of stuff, if they want to reach out? Your handles.
Facebook's probably the easiest thing. Just my name, Paul Duren. There used to be a picture of a scrub python there. There isn't anymore. But there's
The
I think there's a
Cascadia
picture of me,
flag.
Cascadia flag, and a mountain bike. So
Yeah.
Cool.
yeah. So, but I'm in the I post sometimes in the scrub python groups as well.
Cool.
On Facebook. I've got a tiny little Instagram account that I hardly ever use, but so Facebook's probably the easiest one.
Okay. I'll make sure that's linked in the show notes and everything so folks can find you. And
Awesome.
pick your brain. All right, I'm gonna hit the
Happy to.
button. Thanks
Cool.
again, Paul.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Don't go anywhere yet.